I want to go now to the opposition leader, Peter Dutton. He joins us live from the Sydney CBD. Thanks for joining us, Peter.
Thanks very much, Chris. Appreciate it, mate.
I want to start off on nuclear energy because I reckon you must be very pleased that at the moment the only criticism of domestic nuclear energy for Australia coming from the Labor Party is the issue of cost. Surely that means they've accepted that nuclear power is safe, that waste disposal isn't a problem, that the technology is not objectionable for this country.
Well, Chris, all you're getting at the moment is, the personal attacks from Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese. And I think what that says, as you rightly point out, is that they don't have much material to work with and they don't have a legitimate argument against the facts. The fact is that the Prime Minister has signed up to the AUKUS deal, which means that our sailors go on to the nuclear-powered submarine, and it's safe to do so. So they don't have any argument against the technology because it's used in the nuclear submarines, as we're proposing to do with the small modular reactors here, the latest technology, latest generation. They don't have any issues around waste because the government under AUKUS has committed to disposing of the nuclear waste from the submarines and also the reactors at end of life as well. That was part of the agreement that they've signed up to with the US and the UK. We've said where the location should be, that is in brownfield sites. We've got a coal-fired generator coming to an end of life. And the logic to that, of course, is that you can use the existing poles and wires to distribute the energy to households instead of the government's crazy policy of rolling out 28,000 kilometres of new poles and wires.
What is the cost of nuclear fuel electricity long-term compared to renewable energy?
Well, there's a big capital cost in any of these technologies, but what we need to do is get electricity prices down in our country. In Ontario, they're paying half the cost of what Australians are paying for their electricity because of nuclear power. We know that in the United States at the moment, there are some businesses who are leaving Australia to go and set up their manufacturing plants there. They're paying 1/3 the electricity cost that Australian manufacturers are paying here. So I want to bring the price of electricity down. I want to make sure that we have stability in the market so that we don't have the blackouts and brownouts that we're going to get more and more regularly under Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese. I want cleaner power, which we can do because this is a zero emissions technology. I don't believe the government has a credible pathway to get to net zero by 2050. And we have the ability to firm up renewables in the system instead of switching from an old system, which is working, from coal to 100% renewables, which is Labor's proposal. It's a recipe for the lights to go out and for your power bills to continue to go up.
Yeah, given the need to stabilise our system and, of course, back up renewables with some dispatchable, reliable baseload power, is it worth doing this regardless of cost? Is getting into the nuclear age and all of the reliability and certainty that can give this country worth doing regardless of cost?
Well, I think there's certainly an element, an intangible, if you like, and as you point out, to have that stability and the reliability. We know that of the G20 nations, 19 are using nuclear or have signed up to do so. Australia is the only one that doesn't. And in countries where they have it, the price is much cheaper. But I wouldn't be advocating if there wasn't reliability and there wasn't a cheaper outcome for consumers, both domestic and the commercial and industrial users. I want our country, my vision for our country in part, is to make sure that we can keep manufacturing on shore, that we can grow those jobs. I don't want to see Australian manufacturers exported under Labor's energy policy because we lose the jobs, we lose the economic productivity, we just end up importing the products back in. And if we have stability in the system, if we can bring prices down, which I believe that we can, then we can have a very bright future as a country. But if we have intermittent power, lights going out, brownouts, blackouts, a reliance on battery technology that only lasts for 1 or 2 hours, businesses will leave and power bills will continue to skyrocket under Labor, which means that people, particularly those on fixed incomes, pensioners and self-funded retirees, they just won't be able to afford to keep the lights on or to turn the cooling on or the heating on when they need it during the year.
Talking about siting a nuclear power plant in this country, you mentioned those old coal places and coal installations where there's transmission available. You won't be able to get nuclear power in this country without a state government coming on board as well. And you're looking at just wall-to-wall Labor governments on the mainland, for instance, and we've seen how they love to play a partisan game, ganging up in federal politics. We saw that happen during the pandemic with Scott Morrison. But have you reached out to the South Australian Labor government and the Premier there, Peter Malinauskas, who says he has an open mind on nuclear energy? And of course, that state did the work. It did a full royal commission that showed that at 10% return, at 6% cost of capital, they found nuclear energy would be profitable. And more important than that, they said the state could earn hundreds of billions of dollars through a global nuclear waste depository.
Well, Chris, I certainly agree with your analysis in relation to Peter Malinauskas. He's the most honest of the Labor premiers, and he's been very honest in relation to this issue. He understands that South Australia is a very energy-rich environment. They have enormous deposits of uranium that if the export markets were opened up, they could really transform their economy. We also know that South Australia is very reliant on defence industry. And Peter Malinauskas is not somebody who can look in the camera and tell you that he signed up to the AUKUS deal, that he wants those nuclear submarines docked in Adelaide so that they can be worked on, so that they can be constructed, and then in the next breath say, well, I don't believe that nuclear technology is right for our country domestically. Bob Hawke was the last honest federal Labor leader who was able to put his cards on the table as recently as 2016, strongly in favour of nuclear power, because he knew that the latest generation nuclear power is nothing like what we saw in the 60s or 70s or 80s. It is zero emissions, which is why Germany, why Europe, why the United States, North America, why Asia is embracing the technology to firm up renewables. And I think, the Prime Minister's just lacks a vision for this country. He's a weak leader. We see it on a daily basis. And this government now resembles more, I think, the Whitlam government than it does the Hawke government. And at least Bob Hawke had the guts to stand up for our country, whereas Anthony Albanese couldn't tell you what he believes in.
Look, the Green left, including in the media, are fully engaged in criticising the nuclear option, putting a lot of scrutiny on it. And of course, a lot of scrutiny should be applied, but there's very little scrutiny that goes into the renewables plus storage model that we're currently embarked upon in this country. It's cost us a couple of $100 billion already. There'll be hundreds of billions more, and we haven't got reliable or affordable energy. Do you believe that it's actually possible in Australia to get our electricity grid to net zero under this renewable and storage model?
No, and I don't believe that people have faith in the government's ability to deliver it either. It's not just about storage and the fact that the technology is not as advanced as Chris Bowen wants you to believe it is. It's also the fact that the government needs to roll out 28,000 kilometres of new poles and wires. Remember what they've done on pink bats and school halls? They can't deliver 28,000 kilometres of new poles and wires. The existing network won't distribute the renewable energy, and that's why if they build a wind turbine off the Hunter coast or they build a solar farm inland on pristine farming land, it only works if they erect new power lines. And they're talking about it going through national parks. The whole program that they're seeking to roll out costs somewhere up to $1.5 trillion. And people are going to pay for that in their electricity bills. And
well, they sure
Australians
are.
aren't stupid. They've worked this Prime Minister out.
But Peter Dutton, the thing that strikes me is you said this can't be done, and you're right. All the expert analysis says this can't be done, yet you as a party are signed up to net zero. You're signed up to an outcome you don't believe is possible.
Well, a couple of points. Firstly, it's not a linear trajectory to 2050, and we've been very clear about having an open mind to all of the technologies available. I think the Labor Party have put so many eggs in the renewables basket, it's not funny. And my judgment is that we can't achieve the emissions reductions that we've signed up to globally if we don't have nuclear energy, the latest zero emissions technology, which is going to deliver cheaper prices, cleaner energy and more reliable energy, we won't be able to meet our international obligations without that. And the Prime Minister can pretend all he wants. In the end, what is this party, the Labor Party, about under Mr Albanese? It's about winning votes from the Greens and keeping the Greens out of inner city seats in Melbourne and Sydney. That's it. And apart from that, their only other desire is to please the union movement, which you're seeing in the industrial relations space at the moment.
Just another couple of quick things. One is we learned today that the government apparently has revoked visas granted to a couple of Palestinian families en route to Australia, a shambolic situation where they couldn't get on a plane transfer in the Middle East. But does this at least show that the government's starting to do some checks on the people it's letting in from the Middle East?
Well, Chris, I suspect that there is a decision maker within the Department of Home Affairs who's just looked at these facts and been horrified and cancelled the visa under his or her power. We pointed this out from day one. You can't have a situation where the government is bringing people in from a war zone without the proper checks. The biometrics tests haven't been done. They haven't. I just think they haven't satisfied themselves about what's happening on the paper documentation, the travel documents, the identity documents, and why the Albanese government would be bringing people out of the Middle East, out of a war zone at the moment without the proper checks is beyond me. And once people get here, even if they're claiming that they're coming on a tourist visa, they'll claim protection. And those people will be here whether they're of good character or not. I'm sure the vast majority of people coming are of good character, but the responsibility of the Prime Minister is to keep our country safe. And he can't guarantee that with this decision. And it's off the back, of course, of releasing 149 hardcore criminals who didn't need to be released but were released under this government. And now we find that they've botched even the visa that has been issued to those people.
Just one other thing, the US, as you know, are looking at banning TikTok completely or forcing the Chinese interest to divest of it. Should Australia do this, or wouldn't this undermine confidence in foreign investment in this country?
Well, Chris, if the Prime Minister's getting advice from the intelligence agencies that young Australians in particular, but anybody using TikTok, if their information is being exploited, if photos of those young kids are being scraped from their accounts and stored by a third party, whether it's a country or it's a state actor or whether it's an organised crime group, then the Prime Minister has to act. I mean, if data is being scraped by the terabytes off these accounts and young people are being exposed to extortion at some point or just their personal data being collected, if it's not a safe platform, the Prime Minister has a responsibility to act. And so far, I just don't think he's shown the leadership or the strength of leadership to be able to make the decision that's in our country's best interest. And if the United States is offering their government the same advice as our intelligence agencies are offering here, then I just think the Prime Minister needs to be very clear about what steps he's going to take to protect kids online and to make sure that they're not vulnerable and being exposed to the loss of that information, the theft of that information. People should be able to exchange intimate messages or photos in a safe way. And that's, I think, what people think they've signed up to. And if that's not the case, then, and the Prime Minister has that advice, that information, I think it's up to him to act.